Gentlemen, welcome to Destiny Education Hanging with the Fellas podcast with your host, Toina.
Hey, gentlemen, it's Tuesday, and of course, it's Hanging with the Fellas time. I'm Toina, your host. So glad to have you here and so excited to be able to talk to you tonight. One of the most challenging things in life, what makes it so challenging is oftentimes we are not taught how to do that. And the problem is very simple, is that the previous generation didn't do it. The generation before them didn't do it. And as a result of that, that information and that knowledge isn't passed down to us. And it is super crazy challenging to understand how to do that. So today, I want to talk to you about biblical vision, what it looks like, and how exactly we set it up. So let's begin with our biblical foundation, shall we? Proverbs 29 and 18 out of the King James Version. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. What does that mean? Does it mean that because you don't know something, you're destroyed? No. That term is utilized often in the scripture reading, but it's really talking about vision. So let's start with what vision truly is. Vision is seeing and then taking the steps necessary to bring what you see in your mind into focus and into reality that we currently live in. So let me give you an example. I have a client, and since he was a young boy, he has always seen his name in lights in his head. And so when he was young, what he would do is he would go to different auditions thinking that his job was to be in movies, it was to be in theater, it was to be someplace like that. And the more he tried, the more he fell on his face. Well, at the time, he wasn't walking with the Father. As time went on, he became disillusioned and frustrated and was like, what is wrong with me that I see this in my head? I want this, but I can't have it. How come it's always right out of reach? And he ended up doing a job that he really didn't love and he didn't like. And what frustrated him was that at no point in time did he ever fall into what it was he saw in his head. When he reached probably 40s, I think it was his 30s, his 40s, that was when God found him. And he pulled him into his kingdom and he said, let me help you understand what this vision looks like. And he began to take him on a journey that was probably one of the hardest journeys this poor man had ever been on throughout his life. It was much harder than what he went through in the world, but it was easier than what he went through in the world because he always had hope. By the time this young man hit his 50s, that vision started to become a reality. You know, Tyler Perry, in many of his interviews, when he's talking about his life, is that when things don't seem to be happening at the rate you want them to happen, it's the dream that carries you. It's the vision that carries you. In the example of this young man, it was the vision that carried him. He knew what he was meant for. He just didn't know how to get there. And so that's really where we're going to be focusing tonight, because there are some of you who have vision, right? And you see it and you start walking in it and you have great success. But in other areas of your life, that's not so. You may have a vision, like you see yourself married with kids, but every time you start going out with different women, it just does not end well. And some of you know exactly what it is I'm talking about. So what we want to look at tonight is how exactly do we take what we see in our head and start making it happen? I want to explain to you what God vision looks like. Number one, it's not always clear. In the example that I just gave you about the young man, while he saw his name in lights, there was no direction as to how he should get there. He didn't know if he should go into movies. He didn't know if he should go into TV or theater. He didn't know what that meant. What does the name in lights actually mean? When he started finding his greatest level of success, I'm talking about fulfillment and success, things like that. It was when he began to work within the Bible. As he got to know more about the Bible, as he did more with the word, as he learned more about the word, all of a sudden things became easier. And the name and lights began to take on a different meaning because that name and lights wasn't about having Hollywood fame, it was about having fame within the kingdom. And before long, he was receiving invitations left and right to speak at different organizations, at different churches, at different events, because the message he was bringing was powerful. It was something that told not only him, but those around him of his wisdom, the knowledge, and the information that he had. Not long after he started following in that, the money began to follow. People began to pay him. They began to pay for his trips. They began to pay for his stays. It was an amazing opportunity and a dynamic thing to watch. But it took him being willing to let go of this preconceived idea he had of what those lights meant. With many of us, we get so caught up in wanting what that means to us that we ignore what it means to the Father. And when we ignore that key piece, it jeopardizes whatever relationship we could potentially be building with the Father. And let me explain why. Obedience is number one to God. He wants to know that you're going to do what he tells you to do. Now, I want to deal with this because let me tell you, that hits a pride point for a lot of people. Like, you want me to do what you say? I'm a grown man. Why do I need to do? I get you. I hear you. I'm not a man, but as a woman, there were times when God was like, hey, I need you. And I was like, I'm a grown woman. You can't tell me what to do. Let me tell you what, that becomes a problem. Obedience isn't a problem because we're not listening to what God says. Obedience is a problem because the effect that it has on our life is much greater than anything it can do to the Father. And what it has on our life is that it keeps us stuck in one place, and it's usually a place that we don't want to be in. And so we have to begin to understand that as we allow ourselves to listen to what he says and then follow what he tells us to do, it becomes a life-changing scenario. We start seeing success in ways that we never saw it. Now, once the success hit, here's where the next problem comes in. That pride rises up again, and we forget where we came from. I want to give you the importance of building an altar to vision. You see, if you don't build an altar, you cannot stay humble. And I really want to talk about this in light of a recent comment. There was a woman, she was a politician, who said, my children keep me humble, and because this other female doesn't have children, she can't be humble. I want you to understand something. The world's definition of humility is not God's definition of humility. Humility is very simply defined as the ability to allow God to be God. And to understand that while there's a portion of it that belongs to you, the results always belong to him. And when you remember by building an altar where you came from, whatever that beginning was, you find yourself free of beliefs, faulty beliefs, and misunderstandings that happen. Are you with me? Let me try explaining that in another way. If I accept that I am not perfect and that the heart of man is desperately wicked, I don't struggle when I make a mistake or I tell somebody off or I have a bad day and I'm like, here, let me just put you in check because I don't really have time for this today. I go, I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry, Papa, or I'm sorry, Father. And I move on because now I don't have to hold on to that rage and that anger. I don't have to feel guilty. I already know the heart of man is desperately wicked. And there are certain ways that if you step to me, we gonna have a problem. And I'm not one of those girls who gonna sit back and be like, okay, no. I'm one of those girls who like, here, let me hang up my Holy Spirit and tell you all about where you came from, right? And so when we understand that these are the shortcomings that we face, we can start to control for those shortcomings by understanding that's from our hearts being wicked. So one of the key things to building an altar is to be able to look at who you've been and to go, God, I'm really sorry. Like, I can see where this came from. I can see the problems with it. Help me to develop a spirit that allows me to just laugh at my own faults. Because when you don't take yourself seriously, other people begin to respect you more. It's the craziest thing. The inverse is always true. I told you in one of our previous videos that a colleague of mine always says the inverse is always true. When you take yourself seriously, people take you less seriously. When you don't take yourself seriously, people take you more seriously because they're used to the other side. Follow me? Now, vision is always going to be a roadmap to where you want to go or where you should be heading. The clarity of that can only come as you take the steps necessary within that particular area. Okay. So, like with the young man, when he saw his name in lights, had he not continued to move in the direction that he knew brought his name to light, he wouldn't have had space for God to open the door for different opportunities to present themselves and to come his way. And those are the things that I want you to understand about vision. It's all about walking in what you see. You don't have to understand it, you just have to obey. Number 2, you have to be willing to put others first. Now, I'm not talking about sacrificing to extremes. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am saying is this. More people pray for you when you are busy praying for other people than will pray for you when you are busy praying for yourself. The inverse is always true. And I want you to really master that, because when you are walking with the Father, and one of the hardest things to understand when you're walking with him is this: it is never the way of the world, always is against the ways of God. God says, you want more money? Give more money. You want more food? Give more food. And the more you have that give, guess what? The more you begin to get. The more information I give, the more information I get. That's my currency, right? My currency is information. I believe that information is free. Everybody should have the ability to come to ground zero. Everybody should be able to start at the same plateau. There's a foundation that needs to be set, and everybody needs to have that same foundation so that they can use that foundation to springboard into whatever point it is that they're trying to get to. And so the way that we miss forming our vision is when we don't have that foundation, when we don't understand that we have to obey, that we have to put others first. And lastly, that we have to have a heart of joy and a childlike faith as we go through this. You see, when we have childlike faith, things that are negative, they bounce off of us. We can be in the midst of the worst situation, and to the rest of the world, they think, well, how can they be so happy when they've done this, that, and the other? And they come up with all these arguments against you, but you still hold this joy. It's because as a child, the one thing you know is that your Father has you. And no matter what it looks like or how long it looks like that, you know that that is going to come to an end. And so when you have that childlike faith, these negative things bounce off of you, and you can keep moving and you can keep going, and you can be like, oh, I'm not going to worry about this. It's like we had a previous conversation about my doggy, Max, right? And Maxie had a moment where he was walking on ice and he fell on all fours, and he got right back up and he just kept walking. That's what our childlike faith does for us. It allows us to slip and fall and to keep going no matter what it looks like. And that's what God really wants us to focus on, is that we're going to fall. We're going to have missteps. No harm, no foul. Get up, keep going. You're going to be okay. That lack of understanding is one of the ways that we miss forming a vision. And the reason it hinders us is because we get so caught up in the misstep that we blame ourselves. Oh, I'm not enough. I'm not this. I'm not that. So let me help you. I want to give you a moment of freedom tonight. You with me? Come closer. There's never a time in your life you will be enough. That's the beauty of working with God. He didn't choose us because we were enough. Remember, he doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. So we will never be enough. Moses wasn't enough. Look, I stutter. God said, I didn't ask you all that. Here's what I told you to do. And when he stood before Pharaoh, guess what he didn't do? David wasn't qualified to be the king. He was the forgotten son of Jesse. Jesse brought all his sons into the room, and then God had to tell Samuel, it's the one who's missing. And he's like, what? The one who's missing? Hey, you got another son? And Jesse's like, oh, yeah, he's out in the field. I completely forgot. How you gonna forget you got 7 sons? Well, Jesse did. Completely let him go. Let's look at Saul. You want to talk about someone who wasn't qualified? It was Saul. Saul was in the midst of killing the people he was set to serve. How can you be more offbeat than Saul was? God blinded him and said, okay, it's time to go. Here's where you're going to go. And took a blind Paul all the way over to a town where he sent someone to go and remove the blinding from his eyes. Paul wasn't enough, but God qualified him. That's the thing I want you to understand. Every assignment that you're given, you ultimately are qualified for. Not because of you, but because God qualifies you. And when you get to the place that you realize, number one, my heart is desperately wicked. I'm always going to choose to do the wrong thing. And number two, I'm never going to be enough. There comes a freedom in that. Remember, the inverse is always true. The more you understand that God is the one who's leading the way, that the Father is leading the way, the more you accept that Jesus' sacrifice was more than enough, the rest of it becomes easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. So now the question becomes, how do I get there? You start to allow your mind to renew. That's why the word tells you we have to renew our mind daily. And in the process of renewing your mind, you begin to understand that what you think is true is the lie, and that what is actually truth is the thing that feels wrong. T.D. Jakes once said, sometimes what feels right is wrong, and sometimes what feels wrong is right. It will, in the beginning, feel wrong. It'll feel like you're doing something that's against your nature. When you're shifting from things of the flesh to things of the spirit, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel like what you're doing is wrong. That's because the flesh is enmity to the spirit. And as long as you understand that, you can continue to move in that forward motion and go, okay, God, I need you to just show me when I'm like way off base, and watch him. Boy, he will. Boom. And you're like, oh, okay, that was bad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And then you just keep it going. And before long, it becomes game-like, right? Not a game, but game-like. And you start to have fun with it. And you start to enjoy the walk. And you start to have very different conversations and very different understandings of the things that are going on. I want to share another story with you, because this actually I saw with Daryl Eves, and I wanted so much to bring you the clip of the video, but I have to tell you, between this channel and our other channel, I spend so much time watching YouTube videos that sometimes I forget to copy the link. And I think this was one of those videos where I forgot to copy the link. But Daryl Eves, for those of you who don't know, is someone who's considered a YouTube guru. And his book is called The YouTube Formula. And what Daryl was sharing in one of his very long live streams is that when he was a young man, his grandfather sat him down and said, I want you to write down all the things that you want to do. And so he sat down, he created this list. And what he shared in that moment was this: everything he wrote down on that list, he got to do. That's the key that most of us don't follow. We don't write down a list, or we write down this list of haphazard ideas of things we want to do, but we don't really want to do them. And so what then becomes a vision is this: when we are looking at vision and we start doing things that we really don't want to do, or we're really not interested in. For example, I have zero interest in going on a cruise. I wouldn't write a cruise on my list because I don't want to be on a big boat in the middle of the ocean. That is not my idea of a good time. My other idea of not a good time is having to travel off to Alaska where it doesn't get dark for certain periods of time. That's not fun to me. So I wouldn't put that on my list. Now for you, that may be a blast and good on you. Put that on your list. But now what we do is we put that list aside and we never revisit it again. The time when I had to go to Alaska, I sat down and I pulled up plane fare. And I said, why do people make this like it's such an expensive trip? Like, I really thought the tickets were going to be like 10,000 a piece because it had always been presented as this very costly excursion. Imagine my surprise when we could get higher end tickets for like $600. And no, this was long before COVID was even a thought. It's all about finding the right time to do things. You see, what usually happens, like I just shared, is that we do this list, we put it aside, and we never look at it again. That's not the key. The key to vision and the key to being successful in creating that vision is that we have to create this list, but then we have to read the list on a regular basis. And then based off of whatever that list is, we've got to create to-do lists as we go through and we start trying to build our way to whatever that point is that we want to see. And so that's the thing that I want you to know. So here's the last and final point. How do we do this? You know, for you, it may start by looking at what you first don't want. I don't want to be sickly. I don't want to spend my life not being able to walk. I don't want this, that, and the other. Now, here's the key. When you're doing anything with God, don't write down what you don't want. You can know what you don't want, but now you've got to translate it. If I don't want to lose my ability to walk, what does that mean? Well, number one, it means I need to be healthy. Number two, it means that I need to exercise. Number three, it means that I need to stay on top of any health issues I see coming. Okay, those are what we write down as our vision. Those are what we write down as our wants. As we get to that place where we begin to see commonalities, now we can create categories. This isn't something that's going to take you 10 minutes to do. It may take you 3 days, 3 weeks, a month, 3 months to get it done because you've got to really focus on what you want and what you don't want. And that's the last obstacle we have to vision, is that we spend more time focused on what we don't want than what we do want. The key to creating a successful vision is focusing on what it is you want at the end of this. That's how people become unstoppable. When you get it, that what you want is the key that you're aiming for, that's where you go. Challenges. Many pastors will say, the plans of men are many, but it is the will of God that will prevail. Okay, yeah, the word does say that, and we're not saying that that's not valid. But here's the thing I want you to understand about that. God didn't give you a vision so that you couldn't make it happen. He gave you that vision to give you the guiding force that you needed in your life. And so you walking through and getting that done, that's the key. Prayer comes in when you get stuck and you don't know which direction to go. When you don't know which direction to go and you hit your knees and you say, God, help me to know which direction to go. You keep moving along the same path that you're already moving on until you absolutely can't move any further. Then you're going to have to take a different direction or go and do something different that's part of the same project until you get your answer. But God is usually pretty quick. And don't be afraid to go to him in prayer and say, I need this like 10 minutes from now. I need this as soon as possible. And trust that he will bring you that understanding. So today we talked about vision. Next time I see you, we're really going to dive into understanding and figuring out what you want versus what you don't want and how to create a way where you can focus on that. It was great talking to you tonight. I'll see you next week.